Hello and welcome. Alan Plum here again with a little more from Shed Engineering. And the follow on from the last video, and in this one I try to show the time it takes so that anyone doing this kind of casting or anyone with a similar furnace can perhaps gauge or get an idea if the turbo fins are making any worthwhile improvement to what might be considered a typical warm-up time. Now, just a couple of points about the dangly nature. Obviously, the idea is that they should slow down the heat escaping and stop it shooting straight up and out, and at the same time capture that heat and pass it into the crucible. So perhaps the best idea is to weld them in place, but I can't weld, hence this approach. Because the other thing I was worried about is that once the crucible comes out and you're going to do the pouring, the fins will be actually working in reverse, radiating heat away from the crucible, just like the fins on a motorbike engine. And that's why they are sort of like a loose fit. I was thinking you could take the crucible out and then be able to knock the fins down and off pretty quickly, or without too much trouble anyway. I mention this because at the end, when I get to the pour, I lift the crucible out, and this time it actually leaves the fins behind, whereas in the previous video the fins came out with the crucible. So it's about an hour or so after doing that initial first pour. As you can see, this is absolutely stone cold, and we've got the remnants of the fire in the bottom of the furnace there. So I was wondering whether I could give a demonstration just to try and show how long it's taking to get hot. And so I wondered whether if I did another melt or another firing, whether you could actually gauge if it was any faster with the fins on. If we just refuel, so we'll put the crucible back in now. We've put some fuel in. So there we go, we've just refueled as you've seen, and we've put the crucible in. I'll turn the air on in a minute, which will obviously get the fire going, and then we'll just time it and we'll try and show or from that state there how quickly we get up to temperature, and you might be able to, you know, see whether it is any quicker than your average furnace. So I've just put the blower on, and I don't know whether you can see that. It is, oops, there's it. It is 1549. It'll obviously take a while for the fire to get going. You see it's smoking at the moment, it's not that hot. And you perhaps can't see, but because of the strong sunlight, but we've got molten aluminium in the bottom, and it's 15. And I couldn't see the time on the display for the strong light, but it was 1559, 1600. So that's around 10 or 11 minutes or thereabouts. But obviously that was with a virtually empty crucible. Now with the strong sunlight and the heat, I had a job seeing how hot the furnace actually was. I definitely didn't see or realise it was as hot as this. Again, here the camera is being held at 5 or 6 foot up in the air on the end of the tripod, and I'm just looking at the screen to see whether the furnace is in shot. And the fins that you can see, remember those are the topmost fins. You can't actually see the bottom ones, which are obviously even hotter, and that's probably a bit of a problem. And I think the fins are obviously doing a phenomenal job, because we're reaching some colossal temperatures, and probably at this point is where disaster actually struck, and I was actually melting the furnace liner. I think it finally dawned on me just how hot the furnace was, and went off to get some aluminium ingots to throw in and try and cool it down. I think the idea of using the thermalite blocks that have got brilliant thermal properties because of the hundreds and thousands of air bubbles in them must be working. And also obviously the air gap between the liner and blocks, that is also acting as an initial insulating barrier, and that must be working, because even with more scrap added we're still maintaining a very high temperature even with the blower off, so we add some more scrap. And with some more aluminium tube and a piece of solid aluminium bar, she finally starts to cool down. And with the blower back on, it's only a few minutes before the solid bar of aluminium is also melting down into the crucible.
I've just skimmed the slag off and you can see the fins around the crucible are red hot, and obviously the ones lower down will be even hotter.
For me to make that comment, it suggests that I was totally unaware of just how hot the furnace was earlier on. And there you can see that the crucible has come out of the furnace, leaving the fins behind. Now that's why they were sort of made quite loose like that, in the hope they would be left behind, or that they could be quickly knocked off, because I was worried that the fins might work in reverse like I mentioned and actually cool the crucible down. Now, due to lack of experience, that hoop in my right hand is far too short. I didn't fully realise the amount of heat coming off the crucible, and my hand is far too close to the crucible for comfort, and so I've got to step away for a moment because my glove is that hot. I have to waft it about to actually cool it down. But we've obviously reached a good temperature, because even though it's been stood there for heading on towards a minute, there's still no rush. There's plenty of temperature in the crucible for me to continue the pour without any problem. I've edited a few seconds out, you can see I've still got time to extract a couple more ingots and continue the pour, which is encouraging because I'm hoping to do a couple of quite big castings. One will be the flywheel, and then 2 sections for the beam and possibly the columns as well. And so as I say, that's encouraging that I can have that volume of aluminium and for it to stay hot that long. Right, this is the day after, and I've cleaned the bottom of the furnace out, and this is where I discovered that we'd actually melted the furnace liner. Now, if you remember, I made the fire grate to be removable to make cleaning easy, but we've actually melted the liner. That has run down and virtually welded the fire grate into the bottom. And there you see the metal liner has melted and run down, and then behind you can see the thermalite blocks have been damaged as well. The liner was also welded to the fire grate, and it took me a while to actually get that out, and as you can see the temperature must have been well up around 1300 degrees or higher for that to melt away like it has done. Now I know these thermalite blocks are not rated to these very high temperatures. The general idea or thinking was that the metal liner and the air gap would give a certain degree of protection to them, and their thermal qualities would obviously help to keep the heat in. There's only surface crazing. I suppose that's only to be expected, but down at the bottom where we obviously had a severe hot spot, then the thermalite bricks have virtually melted or vitrified. I think there must be a lot of silica in them, because you'll see in a minute there where it's virtually melted. And in actual fact the surface is very, very hard.
Yeah, the thermalite blocks, and it's a very, very hard surface, so in many ways it's still perfectly operational, and actually that is a lot harder than the blocks higher up, which are still very soft. You can see where the liner has run down, or the blocks have vitrified and run down, and that's where I've broken it away. Again, there's some surface crazing down in the bottom, and I think you can see what the problem is. The air is coming in from the left. It's hitting that block that I made here with this curve on to direct the air up through the furnace, because this is blocking the other air channel, because I did think it might need 2 air dryers or 2 blowers. So that is directing the air up, and obviously we're getting a hot spot at this right hand side.
So we better leave it there for the time being. I think the turbo fins are working to good effect. 12 minutes to reach temperature seems pretty good to me. It's a shame about the damage sustained, but in the next video I show why I was getting such an extreme hotspot on that one side, and I also show how I alter the design to hopefully get around that problem. And for anyone melting drinks cans, something interesting, I make an automatic can feeder and preheater, so you might find that interesting. Remember, if you do subscribe and you want notifications of new videos, etc., then you need to click the little cogwheel next to the subscribe banner. I hope you found something of interest or of use, and as always, many thanks for watching.